Welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Join us as we dive into the world of endurance sports, exploring everything from nutrition to training and how these elements shape your everyday life, both on and off the race course. Hosted by Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian specializing in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. We're here to share insights and real-world advice to help you thrive on your journey. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Coach Justin, I'm here with Coach Katie, and today is episode 73, and we are talking about the role of weight on performance. And so we felt that this was a pretty interesting topic, especially as Katie has been going through the studying process for her sports dietitian certification to gain that one back after she had it once before. And it also kind of stems from our interactions together as I've been working with Katie and I'm trying to understand how weight impacts my performance, and whether it's really weight or body composition, or, these are all kinds of different questions that stem from this one concept of weight. And should we even focus on weight? Because in today's society, this is a pretty sensitive topic. Even though there is science behind it, I think that the way that we perceive weight in terms of forming a judgment on potential performance from weight, I think really opens the door to some misconceptions, some actually what can be considered to be dangerous behavior and non-optimal training methods. And so we really kind of wanted just to introduce this topic, I think, because there's so much that feeds into this that there's no way that we can cover this in one podcast episode. Right. But we felt it was important just to kind of introduce this idea and see if we can flush it out just a little bit more and help all of you guys that are out there and the way that you start to think about weight and your performance. So we thank you guys for joining us today. We really appreciate the time that you spend with us. If you are enjoying the content that we're coming out with in the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, we hope that you would consider filling out a comment and a review on wherever it is that you're consuming your podcast materials from. We understand that there is just an ocean filled of podcasts with all kinds of different content. And so the time that you spend with us is greatly appreciated, and we do not take it for granted. But we also decided from day one to not monetize this podcast. We wanted to be able to come to you unfettered and talk about issues that we wanted to talk about, not sell you mattresses and supplements and all this other stuff. We wanted to come to you with a pure perspective from two coaches, experienced endurance athletes, and things that we wanted to talk about and that we think are important to help you in your journey. So please leave us a comment and a review. Those are greatly appreciated because it does help other people find the podcast. If you're finding some of these episodes exceptionally helpful to you and you think that there's others that you think it would be beneficial to, please just share the episode with them. You never know. That's how I kind of stumbled on one of the podcasts that I've been listening to for years. It was just through word of mouth. Somebody shared an episode with me and it really kind of connected with me. And then I went back and listened to their library. And I can tell you, I've actually listened through their library multiple times. And so that kind of stuff is really, really helpful in spreading the word and increasing the exposure to the podcast so others can be helped as well. We also have the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group on Facebook. It's a private Facebook group. We're growing out this community. We're pushing out additional content, some reels and blogs that we're writing. Actually, I posted a poll out there earlier this week to try and get some of the temperature of the group on a particular topic that I'm interested in. And so we felt that this was a great way for you, the listener, to interact with each other as well as interact with us. And so if you are interested in connecting with others or at least just gaining access to some of the additional content, we hope that you would consider just going out, join in the group, answer one simple question. It lets you right on in, and we can start growing out this community a little bit more. And we greatly appreciate your attention. So thank you so much for that. I think that, Osei, we are also active coaches. And so we are bringing on athletes onto our rosters. We're talking with people all the time. And so if you are interested in coaching, whether it be because you're stepping up in distance or something, you're doing something that you've never done before, or you're just kind of uncertain on how to structure workouts and how to sequence them properly to keep you healthy. Maybe you've been struggling with overuse injuries and you can't figure out why this is happening. Or if you're just exceptionally busy and you just don't have the time to try and create workouts that build adaptation that you're looking for and putting them together, finding new ways of doing stuff, and you just don't have that time, consider us. So you can go out to fuel2run.com for Coach Katie. She does run plans as well as dietetics for all sports. You can reach out to me at tabularussellracing.com. I do multi-sport along with single sport training plans, but I do not do the dietetic side of it. And we can start a conversation and see how one of us can help you progress your journey, and we can walk this path together and support you guys. So I think that reaches the end of all the typical housekeeping stuff. So
yeah, I think we're good with that. Yeah,
we want to just kind of like dive in. So
yeah,
I think we're doing pretty good. In terms of like both of our training plans and things are progressing, I think nicely based on our conversation. So let's just kind of like roll right in. So let's start talking about this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie and kind of introduce this, because this is her wheelhouse, and I'm still learning from Katie as we continue to work together. But I mean, I do have questions. I do have things that I'm learning and ways that I'm trying to reframe my thought process on how I evaluate my own personal weight and my performance. So Katie, let's go.
Yeah, and I want your input too, because you've been working with athletes. So I think like this will be a good conversation, and you can ask, have some good questions and things like that as we roll along. I think there's a lot when we talk about weight, like you said, Justin. There's just so much like some stigma there, and especially when it comes to like endurance athletes. And more recently, there's just been so much that's sort of come to the surface with how a lot of, especially we hear from some of the professional athletes and some of their experiences in college or just in the professional scene, and this sort of pressure to be at a certain weight or to lose weight. You kind of hear it from Mary Cain's story, working with Alberto Salazar, and there's so many other collegiate athletes. I have some of my own experiences that I just thought were normal kind of going through college, related to just pressure to be thin, even in high school. Just some of my own experiences with the pressure to be thin that were not even coming, I don't think, from outside sources. I think it was just because that, was a lot of the visual, and that you see these thin women running, and you see, the things I was seeing and experiencing were telling me, hey, the thinner you are, the faster you're going to be. And like I said, I can't remember that coming necessarily from coaches. It was just from me being a very observant high school, person or high schooler. So I think there's a lot behind this, and I want to make sure we cover it in a way that's thoughtful, and kind of doesn't push somebody to decide that they want to be at a lower weight because they think that that's going to make them faster. Because I do think that's kind of what a lot of you hear a lot of times is like, lose weight, weight matters. If you're overweight, you're not, that's going to slow you down. And you kind of hear a lot of this messaging. And there is some truth to that, in some ways, and we'll kind of cover that. But then also there's a dangerous side to it as well that I think is the more concerning thing. And so I generally don't love overly focusing on weight with my clients. I rather focus on other things. So we'll talk about all of that. Any thoughts on what I don't know if you have anything to add to that or thoughts, but
in your opinion, do you think that this is more of a prominent issue in men versus women in terms of the body image that comes along with the pressure to be at a certain weight in order to maintain or achieve some level of performance? Do you think is it more of a female thing? Because I mean, you may not be able to speak to the male side of it because you probably haven't experienced that, clearly because you're a woman. So, I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts.
I think it does affect
Mhm.
both because I think, again, that messaging, kind of I think men kind of get that as well. But I think because there's so much history with like females and being like lighter and like, the less you weigh, maintaining some sort of femininity in sport and kind of being light. So there's like not only the sport messaging from like, okay, the
Yeah,
lighter
there's
you are, the
societal
faster you'll
messaging there as
go, but
well.
also
Yeah.
like the societal messaging. So there's a little bit, I think it's a little bit more, you know, ingrained, like there's more for women generally, like because it's coming from different angles, but it's not like men don't get that. And I think because unfortunately, sometimes especially I think of like high school because I have worked with both women or female and male high school athletes who suffer from kind of that pressure
Mhm.
and under eating. And so it's not just females. I see it in males. And I think a lot of it is just because it may not be coming necessarily from their coaches, but you watch the marathons and you watch,
Yeah.
like even triathlon's a little different. I feel like that they're lean in triathlon, but you have some triathletes who are a little bit more muscular
Yeah.
and you're strong looking. But for running, like you see the marathons and you see these very like lean individuals, very like smaller in size. They're not typically very big or large or tall and very lean, like long muscles. And so this is a very specific body type that you see a lot
Mhm.
of. And I'm not saying that there are outliers that are very good athletes, but I think that sometimes that's kind of what I ran into is just I was seeing these female athletes that were like very, very thin and thinking, oh, well, if I just lose some weight, I'll be fast as well. And so sometimes that just comes from the visually,
Right.
seeing that. And it's not that it's the fault of those elite runners. It's just that that's their body type, right?
Yeah.
And then there are a lot of them are just naturally kind of that way. But I do think it does affect both men and women. It just may be like different influences and different places that's coming from, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
where the messaging and where that's coming from might be different. But I think men, maybe they don't have like you hear about a lot of the female experiences with it from, like,
Yeah.
college, and I don't hear it as much from the male side, but again, I'm not maybe because I'm more, like, resonating with what other women have gone through
Yeah.
with my own experience, I'm just not paying as much attention to because it's not that I don't care, it's just that, so I think it's both, but it's hard, and I think when you asked me a question before we got started too was I think you were kind of asking, like, with men, like, does it affect them this same or, is it gonna have the same impact, and it does, and we'll kinda get into that a little bit more when we talk about some of the detriments of, like, severely under or kind of under fueling and under eating it
Mhm.
in an effort to lose weight and what that can do and why that can be dangerous, but, yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
a complex topic, so I just want people to know that, and we're just gonna try to cover it the best we can and give you some thoughts and different perspectives on maybe a different or so what if you're thinking you need to lose weight, hopefully this will give you some perspective on
Yeah.
that. I mean, I think the first thing I put in here was that kind of I think a lot of people when they're talking about weight, when I see this online, like that sort of Newton's law of motion, obviously the weight is a big piece of that. The more weight somebody has, the more they have to like carry the more weight they have to carry down the road, whether it's cycling or running or even you mentioned drag during a swim, but I just think it's more complicated than that, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like bio I remember being in biomechanics, like, years ago in college, and because you have to take these simple equations, and then you have to, like, somehow also, like, apply that to the human body because like, each leg is like it's not like it's just like a single mass object that you're just
Mhm.
trying to push along, you're trying to like get to go along the road or something. Like a human body is dynamic. There's two legs, there's arms, there's like a center of mass, there's like
Right.
it's not like I remember biomechanics and being like, this is actually like fascinating, but like way harder than just like I thought it was not harder, but like just more to it than just simple physics because you're dealing with like momentum and you're dealing with like, I don't know, just all these other like different things that are going on. So I just want to put that out there too is like, it's not a simple equation. The human body is there's so many aspects to it that make it a little bit more complicated. And so it's not just like just saying the less weight you have, the faster you'll go is not true.
Kind of the way that I think about it is that you have force is equal to mass times acceleration. I mean, that's just Newton's law of motion. So the way that I think about it is that if you're sitting here thinking, well, I need to be smaller in order to go faster, I want to reframe your mindset. I want you to say, I want to be smaller so I don't have to work as hard.
Mhm.
I think that's a better way of thinking about it, because if I have two athletes that are doing the exact, let's say these two athletes are exactly the same, except the only difference is that, one athlete might be 20 pounds heavier than the other one. Now, the lighter one is going to expend less effort to go the same distance under this at the same speed. So assuming everything else is held constant, the level of effort that that athlete has to expend is going to be less than the amount of effort that the heavier athlete would have to expend to go the same distance and for the same pace. The reason that I think that this is important is because endurance sports is not about speed and it's not about pace, even though that's what we talk about like all the time, because it's things that we can observe. It's easily observable and it's easily measured, and it's a lazy way of comparing the performance of athletes in a group, right? That makes perfect sense. But what's more important is endurance athletics is more about effort management than it is about anything else, especially if you're a long course athlete. So I'm talking about things like half marathons, full marathons, and ultras. I'm talking about anything greater than a 70.3 in multisport and triathlon. So you're talking half Ironman to full Ironman. This is effort management. This is not about maintaining speed or trying to get faster per se, because these events they span long periods of time. So if I can go fast, that's great. But if I can't sustain that effort, what does it matter? Which is when athletes come to me and say, I want to get faster, so I want to do some more track workouts. And I was like, dude, we're training for a half Ironman or we're training for a full Ironman. What does it matter what your 100 pace is? Because you're not going to be able to sustain that. It doesn't translate into what it is that you're trying to achieve. So if we can manage effort over that time, then that's what matters. And I think that that ties into this use of weight, or I believe it's the overemphasis of weight, because you feel like you'll go faster being lighter, which, yes, there is
Right, yeah.
truth to that, but that's not the key. That's not the thing to really focus on. Is I want to go at the same speed over the same distance,
For a long
but
time. So it's like
I
durability to
don't
be
want
able
to
to, like,
work as
make it
hard
through.
doing it. Because if you're working less doing it, then the demands on your body in terms of like your ligaments and your tendons and your muscles and all these other things that are allowing you to move, the impact on those is less. And I think that's the key.
Right. Yeah, and also, I mean, keep in mind with speed, if it's truly like, "I wanna go faster," it's like, well, that doesn't make sense because if you look at, like, sprinters, they are, like,
Hmm.
muscular, I mean, yeah, very lean, so we'll talk about body fat percentage, but they're very lean, very muscular, not they do not look anything like an endurance athlete, right?
Right.
So, if you truly wanted speed, because they have power, they have force, they can push against the ground much better, like, produce much more force and power to move them forward, and that is they need the muscle, they need that, to be able to do that. So, that's something to keep in mind too. If you truly wanna be faster, you might wanna actually focus on something a little bit different, but yeah,
Yep.
over the period of running for miles and miles or hours, or doing something that's, yes, that to be a little to have the weight, does matter, does matters, in
Yeah.
terms of like how much, yeah, like your ability to do that, and maintain a certain pace, and you're going to be expending a lot more energy if you're heavier. So there's that piece to it, obviously. I think that's the hard part, is there is some truth to that piece of being lighter does help you with endurance sports. And I think that's what's hard, because uh, I think people are maybe focusing on the wrong thing, or in an effort to maybe become lighter, they're doing it in such a way that it's compromising performance.
Right.
So in the
Right.
end, they're not actually faster because maybe they're injured or they're under fueled. You know what I mean? So it's like and we've talked about that in I think it was like the very first thing. It wasn't even we might even have to revisit this in a podcast episode, but it was like weight loss and how to lose weight,
Yeah.
as an
Yep.
athlete and performance. And we've talked about that a little bit, and why when to maybe focus on that weight loss and when not to, and how to do it in a way that maybe is a little bit more safe and manageable than to just lose it, and why you don't want to do that in the middle of your season, and all that. So we've already kind of covered that, but I think, you know, it has to be done. You have to think about it, and you have to kind of realize that there is, like you said, just in a sweet spot with it. So it's not like the less weight you are, the faster you're going to be, or the better you are going to be able to complete a longer distance in a faster period of time, or however you want to think about it. There's a point, like kind of a sweet spot. And I think some people kind of say like race weight.
Hmm.
I don't know if I, I guess that like, oh, I want to get like to my race weight or something. But I'm like, okay, I mean, I get that, but, like, I think just knowing that it's not always an ever lower and lower weight. And sometimes it's there for people who have different body sizes, that's also something that we wanna consider, because we were talking about that before, was the weight. Somebody who is like a marathon build, like, or a marathon runner build, like, they might, that might be fine for them to be lean, like, you know, some of the Kenyans or some of the male or female distance runners that we see, out there on the course running, like, the Olympic trials or something like that. Like, it might be, you might have that body type, and so to be a little bit leaner, you're still going to be able to be healthier, or to be able to be that body type. But if you're bulkier, you are more a strength-based person, like you easily build muscle, maybe you're more of that type 1 muscle fibers, and maybe you're just like bigger boned, it's not realistic to think that you're going to be able to be lean and small. You have to think about that. Like, your weight, you wouldn't ever want to compare what you weigh and like look up, oh, what is Kipchoge,
Hmm.
weigh or something, and be like, oh, well, I'm about the same height. Like, I'm gonna try to be that weight. Or, so you have to find your race weight, or the ideal weight, is a little bit tricky, because that might be a little bit different for everyone, and we do have to consider somebody's size. I don't know if you've heard of like ectomorph, morph, mesomorph. There's
Hmm.
like 3 different body types or body sizes, and we're depending on where you fall in that, like, realistically where your weight's going to be. You can maybe lean out a little bit, or lose a little bit of weight, but you're just not ever going to be like the size of those distance runners if that's not your body type. And
Right.
so just kind of realizing that, and then accepting it. And I have watched and seen, especially more recently, you see this in Instagram and TikTok and some of those videos where there's a female runner. There's a race that they've done, and they're really lean, like maybe too thin, or not, maybe a little bit on the thinner side.
Hmm.
And then they've gained muscle and a little bit of mass, but muscle, and they run that same marathon even faster.
Yep.
Like, I've seen that quite a few times, where I've seen like, okay, this is me, this is my time at this point, and then they visibly have gained muscle and strength, and now they're running that marathon 10 minutes faster.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's interesting to me, and I think that kind of thing, it puts up I think that kind of brings up an interesting point too, of like, what role does muscle, and is it really weight that we're trying to achieve, and should we really be focusing on our weight so much, or should we be focusing on something entirely different, which is body
Hmm.
composition? I see that a lot, and I think I love seeing that. I love when you see a body that's visibly stronger and more powerful, and maybe a little bit heavier, that can achieve something even faster,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that sends a good message to especially women out there who are thinking they have to be skinny and lean to be able to compete at a high level, especially. So
I mean,
I don't
I
know.
can
Do
just
you have
share
anything?
kind of like my experience working with you
Yeah.
has been
Sure.
that
Yeah.
I've definitely changed my perception when I was on my way to returning back to the sport of triathlon. I actually was chatting with a guy that I knew, and I was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about, doing this race, and, what are your thoughts?" And the first thing that the guy said was, "Well, you need to lose some weight." And I was like, "Okay, that's interesting." And this is a guy. He's an experienced athlete. He's actually a coach, like a personal trainer kind of coach. So, he's trained. He had a point. Um, but I think that it was the wrong approach to use,
Mhm.
because working with you has taught me that the number on the scale doesn't tell the whole story. And I'm telling you, it's so hard to break that mindset. And I'm speaking from my own personal experience, vulnerable here, saying that I step on the scale twice a week and I see a number staring back at me, and my day is either made or is ruined by the number that is staring back at me on that device. I
Mm.
can honestly tell you that still to this day. But working with you has taught me that I need to put that number in context. And so when I started thinking about how I wanted to approach my journey in terms of like dropping some of the weight that's been added on that I couldn't seem to get rid of, I said, well, what else do I need to look at? And so I got one of these really nice, like, upscale like scales, that does the whole electronic signals through the whole body, and it measures all kinds of other stuff. And I was like, this is a worthy investment because it's going to give me some other pieces of information. So there are 3 metrics that I track. I track my water weight, I track my muscle mass weight, and my physical weight. Those 3 pieces of information. So the reason that I did that is because if my weight isn't going anywhere, but if I look back and see my muscle mass is increasing, then that puts that in perspective. It's like, okay, well, the number's not going anywhere, but it tells me that my body composition is changing. And that tells me that, hey, I'm getting stronger, so that the number on the scale doesn't necessarily change. But the way that most people would say that, it's like, hey, I'm working out, but my weight isn't going anywhere, or I'm actually gaining weight. I think that that's important to realize, is that it's not
Mhm.
necessarily just the number on the scale, it's the body composition. How are your clothes feeling? How
Right.
how does the effort feel? If you now can run that same course or the same route, or you can get on the bike and you can ride the same course, but it feels easier, but your weight isn't any different, what does it matter?
Right.
Right? Ultimately, the
Yeah,
fitness is
absolutely.
being gained. You're making progress. But I'm not going to say that the weight isn't important, because it still
Mhm.
represents the impact on muscles, tendons, and ligaments. The body still has to
Right, yeah, that's
absorb
true, yeah.
that force, and weight
Yeah,
matters. But
right,
when I
yeah.
started thinking about it, it's like, okay, well, if I'm stronger, then my body should be able to handle that force. But the way that I've kind
Better,
of
yeah.
gone through now is like I'm still getting some issues that are popping up, and I was thinking, man, I know I'm stronger. I know I see the evidence. My body has changed. The scale number doesn't really represent the progress that I've made, but the what I'm doing in the weight room does. But I'm still having these issues, and I think the reason that that I've reached to this conclusion is like, okay, I don't think I've gotten to the point yet where I've built up enough strength to to manage the force from the aerobic
Mhm.
conditioning. I'm on the right path, but I'm just not there yet. So I don't want
Right.
people to think that this is just kind of like an overnight thing where it's like, now I've lost all this weight, now I should be really fast. I don't believe that it works that way. Will your body have to absorb less force? Yes. Will your pace be different? I think that there is. Yes. You could potentially be faster, but faster doesn't mean that you're more durable. And
Mhm.
durability is what matters in endurance sports.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you want speed, then become a short course specialist and run 5Ks and sprint triathlons. Then yes, I think that there is an argument to be made that weight would matter in those
Mhm.
instances. But when you start
Yeah, I
talking
think
about long course athletes, I think strength matters more than weight does.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it's a little bit complicated because I mean, you still have the weight, you're carrying for that long distance, but I think you make a really good point is like the more strength you have, like the stronger your muscles and if you have strong tendons and you should be able to carry a little bit of extra
Hmm.
weight just fine. So it's not as though, but if you're I think it's like a body kind of also like a body fat thing too. So if it's like if
Yes.
that extra weight is excess body fat, then yes, that's where it becomes problematic because you're just carrying like essentially dead weight, right?
Yeah.
But the more muscle mass you have, even if you weigh a little bit are on the heavier side, like arguably like that shouldn't factor in as much. And then I think also we have to remember that when somebody is maybe losing weight and not doing it in a way that's very safe and they're actually losing some muscle along with it, then they're losing that durability.
Hmm.
So, on both ends of the spectrum, you kind of have like, yeah, the heavier you are, maybe the more at risk you are for injury because you're carrying that weight and that's load on the body and it might be extra load on your tendons. On the other end of the spectrum, it's true. Like when we lose muscle mass and we start to lose weight and we're not fueling our body and providing those nutrients that our muscles and tendons and ligaments and everything needs to be able to function, like then you deteriorate and so does your muscle, so does, so does the
Hmm.
tissue, and then you're more at risk for injury. So there's like a law of diminishing return, I guess, like both,
Yes.
but there's somewhere in the middle and it's probably a lot wider spectrum than people think. Like, because they're like, oh, I got to hit this very specific weight. But it's like, actually, I think it's like probably a little bit, there's probably, it's probably not so narrow. Like, you probably have a
Yeah.
pretty
Range.
wide spectrum. Like, I think like I could probably, if I gained a little bit of muscle and was just able to maintain my training, like I think I could probably still run pretty fast, similar times, even 10 pounds heavier than I am now, as long as it was mostly coming from muscle. So, and, but on the other side, like I don't think I could get much leaner. Like even 5 pounds for me to lose would be detrimental
Yes.
to my performance. I know that because I've kind of like experienced that a little bit, not intentionally, but when I do I'm in my marathon training and I'm training a lot, if I don't intentionally if I'm very intentional about fueling, but but it's hard sometimes to match exactly what you need with, so if I lose a little bit, I can tell. Like even a couple pounds I start to like be able I can tell I'm losing muscle and I that's impacting my performance. So it's very but I think on the other end, I think I could reasonably if I was able to because I have a really hard time gaining muscle. But if were able to gain 10 pounds and it was mostly muscle, I think I would still perform
Yeah.
just fine with even carrying that extra 10 pounds. I'm pretty confident in that, but it would take a lot of work for me to gain that kind of muscle. So
Yeah.
it's just like I'm kind of like at the sweet spot anyways, just where I've ended up because I'm a very intuitive eater and I just kind of and I pay attention to it, but I think it's just like this is where my body wants to be and so I don't push it too much either direction. But I do think that, that brings up a point of like the body fat, is really what we're kind of want I think we want to have a bigger discussion on is like
Hmm.
isn't so much weight, but let's focus on body composition. And so
Yes.
I do sometimes have my athletes. I have had athletes before go in and do like if they don't have a fancy scale that they can get on every day, but maybe go in and do like a body composition measurement using like a bod pod or a DEXA scan, which does have a cost to it, but those are like going to be the most accurate way to measure. You can't do that every week, obviously, but if you had the ability to do that every 3 months or every 6 months, that's one way to get an idea of your body composition. And that might be a better focus. So kind of even taking weight, like I almost argue, like, let's take, if you're, unless you have a lot of excess body fat and you do need, maybe to lose a little weight more for your health, not necessarily for performance, then sure, like focus a little bit more on weight. But I personally like to refocus, especially with my athletes, more on body composition. So what
Yeah.
can we do to make you stronger and maybe lose a little bit of a little bit of body fat into a reasonable range. Now, again, for some of those people who are very numbers focused, like losing, like it's not the lower amount of body fat you have, the better either.
Right.
There's like, so just keeping that in mind, that can get dangerous as well. It's not as though now we're not focusing on weight, but now we have another number to focus on that, still provides a little bit of a dangerous avenue for certain people who are so numbers driven. But I think it's just a better way to focus on it, because then instead of trying to lose weight, we're actually maybe trying to fuel our body in such a way that we're building muscle or maintaining muscle and then trying to lose a little bit of fat. So it's just a different way of fueling and thinking about it. I think it's a little bit of a healthier way to go than, because I think when people are trying to lose weight, they do shortcuts. They're not fueling optimally around their workouts. They're watching calories, which I think is, I think calories matter, but it's like
Old
they're not
school.
paying attention to protein. They're not
Yeah.
paying attention to like how they're fueling around their workout. They're just trying to lose weight, and then that's impacting their performance. So rather than that, I think focusing on body composition can make, I would argue that's probably the better way for people to go and to think about it. And so taking weight out of the picture almost entirely, like not ever measuring it. Like I get on this scale it makes me sad that your whole day is ruined or made or broken by the scale, because I don't know how to change that, but I think a lot of people resonate with that, what you just said there. And I wish that number didn't have so much power for you.
Yeah.
That's exactly why I don't like weight, because it's like
Yep.
I've heard that so many times where people get on the scale and it's like, oh, they're up 2 pounds, or then their whole day is kind of disrupted by that, or they get on and they're down and their day is better, and that just, it's sad. And it's not I'm not saying that because I think it's your fault. I think it's just common to have that happen, and we put so much power
Yes.
in our what we weigh, and I think, that's why sometimes sometimes I think I know getting on a scale a couple times is helpful. If I urge sometimes maybe just once a week, might be a little bit of a healthier habit than,
Yep.
anyways, I just think try not to put so much power in that number, and maybe really refocusing it onto the body fat percentage. But
Wanted to bring up this illustration, and we talked about this before we hit record, and we've already mentioned this phrase "sweet spot" a couple times during our conversation. So I want to create like a visual representation of what what we're talking about, and the way that I perceive this topic. I think weight is the same as any other thing that we would focus on. So let's just use calories for instance. Making it super simplistic. Think of like a straight line, and there's an area that's in the middle of this line, and we'll call that the sweet spot. The length of that box or that area is going to be determined by a bunch of different factors, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there's a range. There's a low end of this box and there's an upper end of this box. Now, on the far side of the outer limit of that box, we'll call that the upper end. So that's where the numbers are the largest, right? So if you're looking at a line and you say, well, the numbers get greater as we go from left to right. As the numbers are large, then we're on the outside of that box. So if we're talking about calories, what happens if we're consuming more than like this sweet spot of calories, right? Now we've got excess calories that we've been consuming, and that has an impact on our body. Now, I'm not going to talk about the impact, but we all understand what that impact is. Now, if we're on the left side of that sweet spot box, right? So now the numbers are the smaller end. Then we're consuming fewer calories than what is optimal. And we all know the consequences of that. Those are the underfueling things and, the performance impact on, not consuming enough calories, which can actually have an adverse effect on weight. You can actually gain weight by not eating enough calories. So the idea on that, when we're in these extremes, is where we have non-optimality and we have adverse effects to performance. What we want is we want to be in this optimal range of calories, and it's a range, and it's going to be a function of your activity level, your intensity level, and your training, and your resting metabolic rate, and all kinds of other different factors is going to determine what that range is, and it's different for everybody. Nobody's just this. Nobody has the same ranges, right? We're all unique. That's the way that I think about weight in terms of performance. There's an optimal range with a lower end and an upper end of weight that is optimal for us in terms of performance and just overall general body overall health. When we're on the upper end, we're carrying more visceral fat because that's going to be the consequence. That's how we would observe the higher weight, and that has consequences to performance. Would you be slower? Yes, because the force that you have to exert to cover the same distance and the same pace is going to be higher. Therefore, you're going to be slower. That's true for swimming, cycling, running, any other motion-based aerobic event. Now, if we're on the lower end of the weight scale, there are consequences to being there as well. So now we're underweight, below the optimum, and there's performance hits to it in terms of the way that I look at it is durability comes into question and your ability to be consistent. Because when you are underweight, then your body doesn't have the stability and the nutrients in order to sustain the effort levels, and therefore that's when we start to get into overuse injuries and things like that. It's not training plan based at all. This is just on the nutrition side and your body. So if we use this statement that if the lower the weight that I can be, the faster I'm going to be, once you get on that left side of the optimal range of weight, your performance is actually going to be hurt. It's detrimental to your performance because you're not durable and you can't be consistent. And we all know that those two things is what determines real performance. And so that's the way that I kind of view weight. Everybody's box is different because everybody's body structures are different. I came to the realization, and it wasn't too long ago, that I'm not going to be lean. That's just the way that my body is just not built that way. I tend to have larger bones, broader shoulders. I'm just a bigger guy. And for me to try and achieve a body type like one of my other friends who is tall, he's 6 foot, super lean, doesn't look like he has any body fat on him at all. He's got that particular body type. For me to try and achieve that body type is impossible. So I'm setting myself up for failure right off the bat. There's no way that I'll be able to achieve that. But what I can be is I can be strong, I can be durable, I can be consistent, and my performance will materialize from those three things. It has nothing to do with my weight at all.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great way of framing it, and I think I would encourage other people to kind of think of it that way as well, as, like, instead of focusing on weight, I think really just I think if people honestly were to focus, maybe even hire a coach, like, focus on the training piece, like, because honestly, like, weight doesn't have really matter at all if you're not training, like, correctly, or, doing
Yeah.
your training plan isn't good and you're not actually putting in the work, or, having the balance of, like, workouts and rest days and all of those important factors, right? Like, then you just like, it doesn't matter what you weigh. It's not gonna make you faster because you're
Yeah.
not putting in the work. So having a good training plan, having a well thought out training plan, having a nutrition plan, like, this is where I think people would really benefit from working with a dietitian, because that, like myself, or, finding someone locally in your area that maybe is a sports dietitian that works with endurance athletes, but just, like, sitting down with someone and being like, well, how, what do I really need to fuel optimally? And really dialing that in, especially if you're not really sure, or you've just been, like, kind of guessing.
Mhm.
Those two things alone will make a huge difference in your performance. And then I think the weight sort of comes along with that, because especially if feeling adequately, and maybe you have a discussion about what your energy needs are, and you're making sure you're meeting those energy needs, and you're getting the right amount of protein, and you're fueling with the right amount of carbs, like, I think naturally the body just kind of, I mean, yeah, sometimes, sometimes maybe there has to be a discussion on if you do have a little bit of weight to lose, like when to lose that at the
Mhm.
right time and how much. But having someone that can kind of guide you through that process so you're not guessing and trying to do it on your own. But I really think if you're dialing those two things in and other aspects of, like sleep and all that, then I think your performance, that's going to be the key factor to performance. And then weight kind of happen, like the weight and the body composition just kind of fall into where they're naturally going to be for you, right? Because I just think, people are focusing on something that it isn't gonna make a big difference if you're not already doing these other key
Yeah.
things, right? And
Mhm.
and if you truly think you need to lose weight, please seek a professional because they'll be able to help you do it in a way that is safe, like, sustainable, that you can get to a good weight. They'll help you be able to set those parameters too. A lot of people like myself, I'll kind of be able to tell if somebody their body type, and so I might not sometimes people will look on, "Oh, what's my ideal weight based off my height?" And they'll look at,
Yeah, it's
online,
ridiculous.
or the doctor will be like this. I don't think that's a good don't do that because the
No.
ideal body weight thing is not it's not helpful. Just try not to look at that kind of stuff and be like, "Oh, well, it says here for my height, I need to be 130 pounds," but maybe you've just in your whole adult life have never been less than 150. Like, I just think sometimes it's that sort of stuff can get you in trouble, and to have somebody that can actually, like, come in and assess where you're at and do that assessment of, like, the type of body you have and where how much energy you need and kinda how to do it all in a safe way if you're absolutely determined you need to lose weight or especially change body composition. So, I think that, that's my one message I wanna, encourage, but I think you're absolutely right, Justin. I think just focusing on let's not even focus so much on the weight. Let's focus on these other aspects that are more important, that are actually going to make you a better athlete. I think that, so yeah,
Because I
do
mean,
we want to
all
talk
you have to do is just go to a race and just spectate the race, and you'll see all these
Mhm.
different body types and structures and
Yeah,
everything
there's
else,
so many
and they're all
people, yeah.
performing. So
Mhm.
if that were the case, and weight was the only thing that really mattered in terms of like getting faster, then the only people
Well,
that you would see performing well would be of that body type, and that's not the case. That's not what you
you
see at
see a lot of
all.
body types doing really
Yes,
well. Like, you have
yes,
maybe at the very, very, very elite level, like, the body types kinda narrow a little bit and you see less
right.
diversity, but most of us aren't going to be
We're not there.
elite,
That's not
so
our
just
representative sample.
don't try,
So,
yeah,
you know,
do not think, like, do not see that person because I know that's something I've been guilty of, seeing, certain elite, women marathon runners and thinking, "Oh my gosh, like, maybe, achieving that body type would be what would make me faster." No, I'm never gonna be like, I'm a good runner, I'm decent. I'm never going to make it to the Olympics. I'm never like, it's just not in my cards. I don't have the genetics or something, there's something missing there that I'm just never gonna
right.
be that at that level. So to com so please don't don't do that where you're like, I'm that's gonna make me faster to look like that because you're most likely you're not an elite runner or an elite triathlete. Like, you're doing it too because you enjoy it, unless you are at the very tip of the, tip top of the pyramid of like elite
Mhm.
athletics and you have to feel like you have to lose a little bit of body fat or get a little bit leaner to be faster, um, then it really doesn't I really just urge you to not be so focused on it because you're not making money likely with it. It's really something that we're doing for enjoyment and for fun. It it's not, yeah, it's just so why be so focused on weight, because
Yeah.
it it should be something we're doing for fun. And if you're so focused on weight and worrying about calories and I don't know, and all of these different things, not enjoying it, I think that takes the enjoyment out of it a little bit too. So
I
something to
think
think
why
about.
I think why we focus on weight so much is because it's easily measured. And so
I know, yeah.
it's a lazy way of measuring potential performance. I want to say it
Agree.
that way in terms of like potential performance because the decrease in weight doesn't materialize into actual performance. It's almost kinetic, it's the potential
Mhm.
for performance. But there, like I said, there comes a point where that potential starts to get eaten away because now you're below that lower
Yeah.
levels. But everybody has access to a scale,
That's true.
really
Yeah, it's an easy, and
inexpensive
there isn't a lot of.
instrument. But in terms
Yeah,
of
you're
like
right.
now
It's an
starting to
easy measure.
measure, now I need to measure body mass and muscle mass and bone mass and all this other stuff. Now we're starting to talk about a little bit more sophisticated measurements, which is going to be an increase in expense. And not
Mhm.
necessarily everybody has access to something like that.
Yeah, I
Using
think you're right.
performance also is subjective. So it's hard
Sure.
to measure. Unless you do the same workout over and over and over again and you see the trend, it's like, I remember how this felt like on day one. Now I know I'm doing the same workout and this is how I feel and it feels easier. But
Mhm.
then that's kind of hard to measure and quantify. But
Right.
simply
Yeah.
stepping on a device that spits out a number is easy. And it's
That's
something that
true.
we
Yeah,
can
that's why
record over time. And
that's
I
why
think that's
I'm
why it's been so ingrained, is because it's
yeah,
so
I know.
inexpensive and it's easy.
Yeah, that's why I don't get on a scale very often 'cause
Yeah.
I think for most unless you're really, like, I don't know, like, just I think it's good to get on once in a while, but I try personally, I can go weeks without hopping on a scale because to me, I don't wanna have that, number be something that I'm overly focused on, so
Yeah.
if it's hard for you to do that, I get it, but, like, I agree with you. There isn't a lot of other that's one thing we can quantify. It's like a number, it gives us
Yeah.
data, right? But I just really encourage you to try not to be as people are listening, they're like, "I'm hopping on every day." Like, we
Yeah.
just try to be a little less focused on that and
Yeah.
try to focus on the other things that matter and enjoying the process of training and fueling your body adequately, and that's why we're all doing it, and again, like I said, we're not most of us in that elite category, so we don't need to be risking our health, like,
Yeah.
try to achieve a body weight that or even a body fat percentage that just isn't realistic. But I do wanna mention just
It's
with
a hard habit to break. I can
hard
tell you
habits,
that.
yeah, it's a
It
hard one
really
to break,
takes
and
a
I don't know,
lot
yeah, I
of
don't know what else to
focus
say
and
to
purpose.
focus on,
Yeah.
but I think if you focus some more of your energy on, like, you know, the training, and even if that means, like, if you're a numbers person and you don't get to some people have a hard time logging meals because the numbers again, like, they're just
Yep.
the numbers can be just troublesome for some because they overly focus on, "Oh, it has to be this exact number," but I think sometimes even just refocusing to, like, logging meals and then having instead of having, like, a calorie goal, like, specifically, or sometimes I think a calorie range is better, but, like, "Okay, I'm gonna aim for, this amount of protein, like, I'm gonna try to
The
get enough
macro
protein, I'm gonna
perspective.
try to
Yeah.
get this amount of fiber, or I'm gonna try to get this amount of carbs around my workout," and having those numbers, and it's like a number that, isn't like those types of numbers, I think, are less dangerous than, like, total calories or
Right.
weight. So maybe you can refocus it and find a different way to to
Yeah.
focus if you're a numbers person, you like numbers like that, to focus on something a different kind of number that's maybe more helpful and useful. So just something to think about too, for those who are listening. How can you focus a little bit less on the weight and more on maybe you can pick a number that's just a little bit more healthy, like
Yeah.
protein or like, "Okay, I'm gonna try to get 60 grams of carbs an hour during my long runs, and I'm gonna try to get this amount of carbs before and after," and thinking about protein and kinda totally sort of not even being as concerned about the calories. If you're able to do that, that might be an option. It's just hard, I know.
Well, I mean,
Sometimes
there's
people
been
want
an
numbers.
evolution. There's been an evolution in how we track nutrition. Where before, let's say 10, 20 years ago, we focused solely on calories because it was always calories in, calories out kind of thing. But
Right.
now we've seen this evolution of not so much calories, but macro composition, percentages of fat, protein, and
Mhm.
carbohydrate. I don't see why we can't use the same kind of evolution when we start talking about weight rather than just
Mm.
using weight, which is just a single number, which is synonymous to just tracking calories. Now take a more holistic approach to, okay, weight is one piece. Now muscle mass is another piece,
Mhm.
you know, water weight is another piece. So there's
Right.
multiple pieces that are giving you a more well-rounded picture rather than just that single number. Just like we've evolved from how we look at nutrition, we need to take purposeful steps to evolve how we look at weight and body composition in order
Yeah.
for there to be real progress.
Right. And yeah, hopefully like the scale, like you said, you have kind of a fancy scale. I'm hoping that type of technology with the bioelectrical impedance, which isn't perfect, but at least it can give you an idea of how things are changing over time. Like to have more access to those types of scales might be helpful. So
Yeah.
if you do like to if it be helpful for you to sort of see those types of numbers and focus less on weight, that might be a thing to consider, like by looking into some of the scale you have. I do wanna mention with the body fat, one thing I just like, so if you are, like, let's say you get a scale or you do go in and do a body composition measurement, for women, the body fat, so generally, and again, everyone's different, like, I
Mhm.
was telling Justin before we got on, like, I've had my body composition measured throughout the years. Seems like for me, like, around there's a certain percentage, I'm not gonna actually say because I don't wanna put out numbers, but when I when I get less than that and it's not the low and for my composition is actually, like, a little bit different than this, like, when I get lower than that, it's kind of higher than what they say in the research, but I start to feel some performance detriment, so for me, I kind of need to be slightly at a higher, percent body fat not super high, but I have to be at a slightly higher percent body fat than what maybe, is considered dangerous, like dangerous or that cusp
Mhm.
of being too low, um, to be able to maintain my health. So we need to keep that in mind too. Like even like with weight, body composition has its, and we'll talk about some things that can happen if we are too lean or lose weight too quickly. Some of the dangerous effects, but for women, that's like too low is likely less than like 10 to 13%. So when you're kind of hitting,
Yeah.
that would be maybe dangerous. I mean, but the danger zone sort of happens for women. Generally, when women need to be careful when their fat percentage is less than 16%. You know, bodybuilders can get pretty low, but you have to remember that they're not that low forever. They get low for their competition and then they gain
Yeah.
weight back and then they'll kind of be in a certain healthier range and then they'll so when you're looking at body compositions, it's like bodybuilders can get really lean. That's not at all a goal that anybody should have in any sort of long-term, duration. But they can get probably less than 10%. Athletic fit kind of in that 14 to 20% range. And then healthy an average body composition for women is somewhere between 20 to 30%. So those are
Those are
just,
pretty those are pretty wide ranges. So if
mhm.
you think about it,
Yeah.
it's like
So
that
so if
you
you're in
know,
like 20%, like there's
yeah.
like maybe you don't need to be, going much lower than that. You're probably okay. So don't feel like you need to be like, oh, I've got to hit that 16%, like right before the danger zone or something. Because again, even when you're trying to achieve ever lower and lower body composition, it does have detrimental effects. And I did put here for men, um, it's usually a little different because women need a little bit more body fat percentage for reproduction. And, if you think about it, we are the ones who have babies, and so our body does react differently when our body composition gets too low. So women do kind
Mhm.
of carry a little bit more fat, and that is okay and normal and healthy. For men, the lower range is like less than 5% is really where it gets quite dangerous, but generally, like for endurance athletes might hover somewhere between like elite endurance athletes between 6 and 13 to 15%. But again, for men, I think I didn't look up like the normal like healthy range for men, but I think it's like maybe similar to women, maybe just a slight bit lower, but um again, it's like so maybe 50, 13%, 15%, like, or below 20%, between 13 and 20%. I don't know. Like, so,
Yeah.
but again, I don't think that because 6% is the low, the lower end of that range, that should be something you should strive for because that is like where you're kind of getting into the danger zone. And men actually are at risk for hormonal disruptions and the similar things as women. I think that was so let's talk, maybe shift gears if you don't mind, and
No,
we
no.
can kind of shift gears. So what happens when are under fueling and we take this a little bit too far, because I think
Hmm.
that's where the concern is, right? That's where the danger is what happens when somebody takes this sort of, I'm going to be lean and thin to perform better, and they take it too far, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, had you heard of red relative
Yes.
energy deficiency?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the biggest, and I think it used to be the female athlete triad, which was a combination of like underfueling, over exercising, and then the loss of the menstrual cycle. But what happened was we realized that it's not just a female problem. Men can have undereat as well and have similar issues. So instead of a female athlete triad, which kind of just was obviously just kind of singled out for women, they came up with the red S instead. And so that's just basically what that is what that stands for is, there's a few aspects of it, but like when an athlete is consistently under fueling and consistently kind of over exercising, they kind of are now in this red S category, and there are certain like symptoms and things that can occur that would kind of would signify that this is kind of happening for somebody. I don't know. I think if we can, do we want to dive into some of the kind of dangers of being, like what like, because I think the biggest thing you asked me, or was with men, but for women it's I've mentioned this already, but it's called amenorrhea, and it's just
Hmm.
the loss of the menstrual cycle. So women, that's a big, I think for women it's a little easier because we have a body is signaling to us like, hey, there's
Yeah.
something
There's
wrong
something that you
here.
can observe that's happening.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so it gets a little trickier for men, and we can talk about that, but for women, it's like as soon as you lose, or you start to have an irregular menstrual cycle, or you lose your menstrual cycle, that is not a good thing. And
No.
I think that for a long time, especially maybe when I was younger, that was like, kind of viewed as like, you know, a normal thing that happens for endurance athletes, and it's not. It's the signals that our body is telling us that something is wrong, and the reduction in estrogen levels, and that can have a very detrimental effect on our bone health. And so unfortunately, if you're in this sort of like amenorrheic state for too long, you can have bone fractures are common, and obviously that's going to have a huge problem for performance because you won't be able to
Yeah.
train. So just keeping that in. When the other thing about bone mineral density, this can also happen with men as well. When they're under fueling, it's just that they don't have that signal, right? Like
Right.
there's like
We don't
so I
we
think
don't
that
have a
maybe they're
menstrual cycle to lose. So I mean,
so
it's
maybe I think
kind of
that men can
obvious.
kind of be maybe be longer like duration in this sort of state
It
sometimes
might be, well,
before.
maybe we could say it might be harder to conclude that we're in that state because
Right,
there's
yeah.
something that's
And
not
so
necessarily observable like that. I mean, if we start to have like bone density issues, then maybe the first potential conclusion that people would draw is like, oh, well, your training plan is off or you're
yeah,
overtraining or something
exactly,
like
yeah.
that. You start
Mhm.
getting stress fractures and things, but it's not necessarily always training plan driven, which is something that I've tried to say many times on this podcast, is that overuse injuries and stress fractures are not necessarily directly tied to an improper training plan. Will
Mhm.
bad training plans contribute and cause those things? Absolutely. But poor nutrition also has the same impact, even though you could have the optimal training plan. If that other piece isn't there, then you can have the same issues arise.
Oh,
It's
right,
just I
yeah.
think it would
And
be a
then
little bit
and then you
harder for us to
combine
see it in men.
you combine, like, overtraining or training a lot with underfueling, and it becomes a massive problem. And it's just I think with men, it's like that we're not a lot of people aren't, as aware that men can suffer from this because, it's just again, it's just society, a little bit. There's, like, some societal impacts of, like, oh, men generally, don't have eating disorders or don't have issues, and so that and I think that's unfortunate because there's probably a lot of, young men and men participating in sport who are suffering, who are not
Mhm.
being who are not recognizing it themselves, or they're not their healthcare provider isn't, and so they maybe do get like a stress fracture or something, and it's just like, oh well, you are training. You're training too much, but it may be not that at all. It might be just that they're not fueling adequately. And I think that's less for men, like, less likely to be looked at, and unless a provider is very knowledgeable, and then they might say, okay, like, this seems like a problem, let's measure your testosterone levels. Because for
Yeah.
men, the testosterone diving, a dive in testosterone below normal levels is a sure, like, a pretty good sign that maybe underfueling and red S is happening in combination with maybe other things going on, like a full assessment maybe being done of like their dietary, like what they're eating and their exercise levels. And, that's usually where a dietitian can come in and kind of assess those things and determine, okay, and then along with maybe some lab work, this is happening, right? So like, but it's
Yeah.
harder
So
because it involves more knowledgeable providers, like, doctors, and, sometimes an input from like a dietitian or a coach or somebody also noticing something's wrong. For men,
I,
that isn't always happening.
I do want to put a little caveat to that, because if we do have lower than optimal body fat, yes, the testosterone levels can drop. But just because you have low testosterone doesn't mean that you now have too you have too low body fat. The
Yeah, no,
caveat is that
yeah.
if your testosterone levels are dropping and you're at an age where testosterone levels should not be that way, then that's a point of concern.
Mhm.
But the older that we get as men, our testosterone levels will naturally start to decline, and you know, I don't want people to think that, oh, well, if my testosterone levels are falling, it's because, I have too less body fat or there's something else going on. You could just be at a natural age in which your testosterone levels are starting to fall
Yeah,
naturally.
and sometimes they'll do like when they test it, they'll test it and they'll have like an age
There's an
adjusted.
a there's an
Yeah,
age range that they said for people aged X to Y, this is the range of testosterone that you would expect in those individuals. Now,
right.
whether you
Yeah.
lie outside of that age range, but that's their benchmark that they use to determine
And
that.
there might be, I mean, there can be other things that influence testosterone too, but I think for exercisey, like, endurance athlete, male endurance athlete, I think that if that's dropping, that just warrants further assessment, right? It's not
Yeah.
just like, okay, now we don't just diagnose red S with just that alone, but it's then, okay, well, we need to look into this a little bit more. And sometimes if that's happening along with like an injury, a bone injury, or just, I think other issues too, you might run into is just like performance, like when we're
Yeah.
not, over time. The unfortunate thing is, this is the unfortunate thing. Sometimes when people are losing weight or reducing their energy levels, they might have an initial improvement in performance because maybe
Yeah.
they've lost a little weight. I don't know, there's usually it's a very temporary, but it happens. Like, so unfortunately what can happen is that either male or female athlete might decide, I'm gonna lose some weight to perform better, and they'll initially see an improvement, and that kind of, okay, justifies what they're doing,
It
right?
reinforces it. Yeah.
Reinforces it. It's like, okay, oh, look at, I'm performing better. But then it usually there's like and it happens differently. I mean, some people can go for quite a while having improvement in performance, and then there's this, and some people not so long. Maybe it's less time, so it depends. But then there's always a cusp, and then there's a obvious, like a steep downfall where either they end up with an injury or their performance just dive bomb, like their performance just really declines
Yeah.
rapidly. And so in fig that's the unfortunate thing about it, is that, and I think that sometimes that reinforces that thought, because then perhaps that athlete's like, oh, I'm, maybe talking with other athletes like, oh, I'm losing weight, I'm, or whatever, I'm losing weight, or I've, performing better, and that kind of then reinforces that for other people, and maybe even people who experience that improvement may be like, "Oh, yeah, this is what you need to do to be faster. You need to lose weight because I'm experiencing benefit." But if they continue down that path of underfueling, eventually their performance will take a nosedive. It just depends on how long, like, it's surprising to me how long people have been able to sustain, like, that level of lack of energy intake and
Yeah.
training volume, and be able to perform well. Like, that is just a testament to, like, how resilient the body is in general. But there's always, if you continue down that path, I guarantee you there will be something not good. Some negative thing will happen, and so it's not worth it.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it. So
Well, you have to approach it in such a way that you're losing visceral fat and you're just not losing weight,
Re
because
yeah, or just
you
visceral
can
fat,
you
but
can cut
also,
it to
like
the point where now your body starts to cannibalize muscle. And
right,
you know
yeah.
if it's hard to build strength in the weight room, because if you have low
You're not getting
testosterone
energy, yeah,
levels, you don't have
so
the energy, you don't have the ability to build muscle and build strength.
right,
And so as you start to continue to lose weight, the body starts to cannibalize itself, and it
right.
starts to eat away
Mhm,
at that muscle, which if then now you're losing muscle, now you're
mhm.
going to be weakening your durability, and which
Right,
is why you
absolutely.
start to find, the onset of stress
Injuries, yeah,
fractures and overuse injuries and things like that. And it's just going to leave you sidelined.
right,
Is That's a potential cause of that, is because
yeah.
now you've weakened now structural and strength infrastructure. So
Mhm.
it now can no longer handle the aerobic load.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think I think we made a pretty good point here with our I think most people listening hopefully will have a perspective on the weight. We put it out there pretty good. We've been, I think, pretty delicate with this topic. I mean, I feel
It's hard. It's a
it's a hard
fine
one
it's a
to be
fine
delicate
line that we
with,
have to
so I'm
that
sure
we're
maybe there's
trying to
some things
walk
we've
here.
said, maybe some people will find insulting, I don't know. But,
It's
I
fine.
just wanna leave, like, one last thing here. Okay, so if they're, like, coaches, I wanna just sort of phrase this here. So, if we have, like, a coach, listening to this, or either high school or just a coach in general that works with, adult athletes, I want maybe leave with just some tokens of things that you would wanna, consider or ask your athletes even in that initial assessment that would kind of make you more aware of their risk for this. And
Uh-huh.
obviously, like what you experienced, please don't tell your athletes that they need to lose weight. Like,
Right.
I just, especially as a coach, if you're not a dietitian or someone that's going to help them actually achieve that and not have the knowledge to be able to do it in a way that isn't going to cause an eating disorder, please do not tell someone, I think you need to lose weight, to be faster. Like, please don't do that because I think that can cause harm. That's one thing I
But
wanna
I
say.
do want to say though that if you're going to do that, you need to do it in a way that justifies why you're saying that.
I
Because
guess, yeah.
if the guy would have come to me and said, "Hey, the first thing you need to do is lose weight," and this is why I say it, is because the extra weight that you're carrying is going to put extra load on muscles and tendons. You already have issues with overuse injuries, and so you just have a genetic predisposition to having this onset. You deal
Mhm.
with you stack on inflammation really really easily, and it tends to things. If they would have approached it that way, I believe that as a coach, we have to be realistic and straightforward, but we have to do it in such a way that justifies why we're saying it. Just saying, hey, you need to lose weight in
Mhm.
order to get faster. I don't agree with that,
Yeah,
because
but I also
we've
think, like,
proven
you
that that's not the case. But
if you're going to say that to someone, make sure you
you
provide
have to be delicate
delicate
and,
resources for them,
straightforward. Yeah.
or refer them to somebody who can help them with that rather than just even if you say why, like, I still think people can they'll understand, oh, the why behind it, but the approach they might take to do it can maybe be
Yes.
detrimental. So I just think if you're going to have like that sort of discussion, you either need to be able to have the knowledge and expertise to work with them to help them with that, or you're going to want to refer them out. Like, okay, I think you would really benefit because you have all of you have extra weight and that's putting a lot of pressure on tendons and ligaments, and I want you to go see this, sports dietitian, or if I feel like that you
Yeah.
would benefit, and then, they can help you figure out what would be the best approach for you, and what may even be a good healthy weight goal, or a body composition goal or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what but I do think it's helpful as a coach to um if you're comfortable with it, like if you I do think asking um your client if they've had a history at all with injury, obviously you're going to ask that, but like delicately,
Yeah.
if you can ask about eating disorders or disordered eating, just being aware that that might be a possible thing they've struggled with, and just make sure that they're not actively still struggling. And again, if they are, referring them out, because as coaches, we want to have them be successful. We want our athletes to be successful. And if they're struggling or they have struggled in the past, but they're especially currently struggling with any sort of disordered eating tendencies or anything like that, I think it's really important to refer out or at least be knowledgeable of that so that we aren't saying things that might trigger those
Right.
tendencies or triggering the eating disorder. Because some people who had it in the past, it's kind of always underlying. It's always kind of
It's always there.
it's like an
Yeah.
addiction. They're kind of always they're in remission. They overcome it, but it always can kind of come back in stressful situations or in certain circumstances. There's always that possibility that those tendencies and eating disorder, like I don't know, things that they're doing that they've done in the past can come back. So just be aware of that. And then yeah, I think just asking those questions and then just being mindful about delicacy of that weight topic and not just like we've just talked about. And then if you do ask about their weight and if they have a weight loss goal, maybe I think sometimes I'll just ask questions like why? Why do you want to be?
That is
Why do
exactly
you
what I was just about to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like why is it that you want to be at that weight? What like why that's weight? Like, because somebody comes up with the weight and they're like, why is it? Well, I looked it up on,
Yeah.
Wikipedia and I saw that so and so weighed 100 or whatever and they're about my height. So that's, or whatever it is or it's because I looked up ideal body weight and it says that that's where I'm supposed to be. So then I think it's like a discussion of okay, what have you weighed? What is your weight history? And if it's like
Yeah.
that's way less than they've ever weighed or it seems way unrealistic, I think having that discussion like, okay, that seems a little bit unrealistic. And then, maybe having a nuanced discussion with them about like some of the topics we brought up about weight and why we want to focus on other things, maybe more so than so much on weight. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other things that you would
I just
encourage
think
coaches?
as coaches we have to become really good at just asking questions.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, if I have an athlete that comes to me and says, hey, I need to lose weight. Well, my first response is, why do you feel that way? Well, I want to lose weight because I want to get faster, or my ankles hurt all the time, and so I want to lose weight in order to alleviate pain.
Right.
Then that gives me some context on why they feel that the way they do, and why they want to go with a particular approach. Because I may not agree that what they're thinking will deliver what it is that they're wanting. So as coaches, we have to become really good at listening to our athletes and then constantly just asking questions, question after question, because once we become more insightful as to what our athletes are thinking, that allows us to have the information that we need to guide them appropriately. Because, I mean, if they come to me and say, hey, I want to lose weight, my athlete loses weight, but now they get hurt, and so the performance never materializes, is that my fault? That, because they took the weight loss to such an extent that it jeopardized their potential performance, and I gave them a training plan that was supposed to just create performance. Who's to blame in that scenario? So,
Yeah, that's true.
as
And
we
they'll
are
probably
there,
blame you.
and they'll blame us.
Yeah.
They'll blame the coach, and I think to a certain
Yeah.
extent, some of the fault lies there because the coach just didn't ask the questions that they were supposed to ask.
Yeah.
Because our job is not to guarantee performance, but is to set them up for success. And unless we're asking questions and understanding why it is that they think the way that they think, we can't provide them the best avenue that minimizes the risk that's associated with getting them there. So that would be
Absolutely.
my
Yeah,
point. So
I
there's
agree.
there's nothing wrong with having the weight conversation. If anything, it definitely should happen at some point in time, and we
Mhm.
have to become comfortable with having that discussion. But we also have to handle it with care as coaches and as mentors for our athletes, and not being afraid to have that conversation, but having it in a way that
Yeah, and I think
protects the athlete.
you could ask some tough questions, like I said, like
Yeah.
why do you want to be that weight and what do you think that's going to do for you? And then kind of maybe helping them with resources or other things that kind of maybe counter some of, especially if they have thoughts about it that doesn't seem very healthy, like maybe helping them kind of counter some of those thoughts and refocus on
Hmm.
something that's going to be more productive, like
Yeah.
fueling adequately or focusing on their training plan and kind of helping them, especially if they're very focused on weight, to kind of come away from that so that they can maybe be a healthier, and
Yeah.
happier too. So yeah, I think we kind of covered all of that pretty well. I don't know if I have anything else to add. I think that was a great way to
I don't
end
have
it,
anything
just with
else.
coaches,
I do want to say though that if you're out there and you're listening to this conversation that we're having, and Katie already suggested to go and see a dietitian, that's the one thing that I would strongly recommend is to seek a dietitian. Now, there's a difference between a nutritionist
Mhm.
versus a dietitian. And so just because somebody is a sports nutritionist does not mean that they are a sports dietitian.
Yeah.
So I think that that's an important
Yeah, the
distinction to
word
make.
nutritionist is vague. There's no, I mean,
Yes.
somebody could have like a weekend certification and they don't really actually know a whole lot. I think unfortunately it's that thing where sometimes people, when you learn a little bit about something, sometimes you kinda like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like what there's a word for that, but like some people might seem very confident, but I feel like when people are overly confident sometimes, but just ask their credentials and make sure if it's like a
Hmm.
CSSD, like a sports dietitian, that's probably a good way to go because they'll have a lot of knowledge. And now dietitians are required to have a master's degree. So like I have a master's degree in nutrition. So it's like a little bit of obviously advanced education. And then there's years of experience in my case working with endurance athletes and athletes in general. So just asking, finding someone that has the experience, has the background, has the education, make sure you do that because otherwise I feel like you could be doing more harm than good. And especially when it
Yeah.
comes to like weight and performance. But definitely I think it's worth, seeking help with this. And if you feel like you're listening to this, I just want to put this out there too. If you feel like you're listening to this and you're like, "Oh man, I kind of feel like I do have some disordered eating," or you're feeling like, because I don't want to ever trigger anything either. I don't think, hopefully we've said anything that's kind of triggered people's eating disorder, but if you're feeling like listening to this and it's triggering you a little bit because you are actively in an eating disorder or you're struggling or you think you're kind of struggling with disordered eating, please get help, for that before it, because it's like eating disorders can be like a monster. They'll take over your life and everything,
Yeah.
like an addiction. They can be very disruptive and very dangerous. And it's just, I really want you to please go seek help for that. Like talk to your doctor, get some help from, and not even just this, in that case, you might actually need a very specialized sports or eating disorder specialist, but please get help because you
Yeah.
don't wanna live that way, so you
Do
wanna
you have relationships with those types of specialists?
I do, I can, yeah, if somebody comes to me, I
Okay,
can
so if
refer.
you're listening to this episode and you're kind of feeling that this is a bit of a triggering episode, at a minimum, and if you don't know who to reach out to, or you don't know, you don't have a support system like that, then I'm going to speak for Katie. I mean, maybe just reach out to Katie. You can go to
Okay.
fuel the number 2run.com. All of her contact information is there. You can email us at the podcast, and I'll make sure,
Just, yeah,
we'll
reach out
make
to
sure
me.
that the emails get, and then we can
Mhm,
point you in the right direction with
mhm,
resources that would be helpful for you.
yep,
That's if you don't already have an established system and know
system,
who
right.
to go to. we
Mhm.
can we can help you
Please,
out
yeah,
there.
just come ask for help, please, because I know how much that can take over someone's life to be in that situation, so please get help. And
Yeah.
yeah, reach out to me. If it's an active eating disorder, I will refer out. If you're like, "Well, I've had one in the past and I'm worried, I wanna perform or whatever, and I'm worried about it," like, I can work with people who are not actively, so I do work with people who've had eating disorders or have a history. As long as they're not actively in that, then I'll generally refer out because that isn't exactly my specialty, but I will absolutely help you find the right resources, so please do that if you need.
Great. All right. I think that this has covered this topic pretty well, or at least in terms of an introduction. So things that that we can continue to have this conversation in the role of weight on performance. And, this has been really enlightening. It's something that's definitely kind of hit close to home based on my history and my background and kind of like my behind the story on how I got into endurance sports. So this is definitely something that's been helpful for me as an individual, and hopefully it's been helpful for you guys. So this has been episode 73 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode and you feel it's helpful for somebody else that you may know, please share the link with anybody that you think it would be helpful. We would appreciate it if you would at least consider a review and a comment to the episode, wherever it is that you're consuming your content from. Just off the bat, we're on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. So we're on those 4 major ones. There's a couple of the minor ones that we're on as well, but those are the major ones. Leave a review and a comment. Those are greatly appreciated. And we thank you so much for the time that you spend with us. That definitely is not taken for granted and doesn't go unnoticed. So again, thank you guys for joining us to episode 73, where we talked about the role of weight on endurance performance. I've been your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie. We thank you guys, and we'll see you next time. That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.